I call on counsel for the United States.
We are resuming the presentation of evidence upon the conspirators' plans for Germanization and spoliation. The next general subject upon which we propose to introduce evidence is the conspirators' plans for the spoliation and Germanization of the Soviet Union. As Mr. Alderman has shown, the invasion of the Soviet Union was the culmination of plans meticulously laid by the conspirators. We wish now to introduce evidence upon the conspirators' plans for the exploitation and Germanization of the Soviet Union after their anticipated conquest. The chief prosecutor for the Soviet Union will demonstrate what the execution of these plans meant in terms of human suffering and misery. We submit that the few exhibits we propose to offer at this time will show the following. 1. The conspirators planned to remove to Germany all foodstuffs and raw materials from the south and southeast of the Soviet Union over and above the needs of the Nazi invading forces and the absolute minimum necessary to supply the bare needs of the people in these particular regions who produced these materials. This region had previously supplied the northern area of the Soviet Union, which the conspirators called the forest zones. The latter zone embraced some of the leading industrial areas of the Soviet Union, including Moscow and Leningrad. 2. They deliberately and systematically planned to starve millions of Russians. Starvation was to be accomplished by the following means. A. As indicated under point 1, products from the south and southeast of the Soviet Union, which ordinarily were sent to the industrial regions of the north, were to be forcibly diverted to Germany. Moreover, all livestock in the industrial regions was to be seized for use by the Wehrmacht and the German civilian population. The necessary consequence was that the population of the northern regions would be reduced to starvation. B. They established the following order of priority in which food produced by the Russians would be allocated. First, the combat troops. Second, the remainder of troops in enemy territory. Third, troops stationed in Germany. Fourth, the German civilian population. And lastly, the population of the occupied countries. Thus, even Russians in the food surplus area of the Ukraine, who were not essential to the production of products for the German war machine, were to be systematically starved. Point 3. They planned the permanent destruction of all industry in the northern area of the Soviet Union in order that the remnants of the Russian population would be completely dependent upon Germany for their consumer goods. 4. They planned to incorporate a part of Galicia and all of the Baltic countries into Germany, and to convert the Crimea or an area north of the Crimea, the Volga territory, and the district around Baku into German colonies. I now turn to the specific items of proof. I first offer in evidence document number EC 472, USA exhibit number 315. This document is offered for the particular purpose of showing the status and functions of the Economic Staff East, Group LA. The exhibit which we shall next offer in evidence was prepared by this organization. Document EC 472 is a directive issued by Defendant Goering's office for, quote, the operation of the economy in the newly occupied Eastern Territories, unquote. It is the second edition and is dated Berlin, July 1941. The first edition was obviously published sometime before July 1941. The document was found among the captured OKW files at Feckenheim. Under this directive, Defendant Goering established the Economic Executive Staff East, which was directly responsible to him, and under it created the Economic Staff East. The Economic Staff East, in turn, was subdivided into 4 groups: the Chief of the Economic Staff, Group LA, Group W, and Group M. I now quote from page 2, lines 7 to 9 of the English text. In the German text, it is at page 7, lines 7 to 9. I quote, Group LA, functions, nutrition and agriculture, the economy of all agricultural products, provision of supplies for the Army in cooperation with the Army groups concerned. Close quote. I next offer in evidence document number EC 126, which is USA exhibit number 316. This is the report dated 23 May 1941, which was before the invasion of the Soviet Union. It was found among the captured files of the OKW. It is entitled, quote, Economic Policy Directives or Economic Organization East Agricultural Group, close quote. It was prepared by the Economic Staff East, Group LA, the Agricultural Group, which, as shown by the exhibit introduced a moment ago, was an important part of the organization which Defendant Goering established to formulate plans for the economic administration of Russia. The underscoring in the English text merely reflects the underscoring in the original document. The document begins by a recitation of figures pertaining to the production of agricultural products in the Soviet Union. It states that the grain surplus of Russia is determined by the level of domestic consumption, and that this fact affords the basis upon which the planners must predicate their actions and economic policy. I now quote from the 6th and 7th paragraphs of page 2 of the English text. The German text is the last 3 lines of page 3 and the first 5 lines of page 4. I quote, "The surplus territories are situated in the black soil district, that is, in the south and southeast, and in the Caucasus. The deficit areas are principally located in the forest zone of the north. Therefore, an isolation of the black soil areas must in any case place greater or lesser surpluses in these regions at our disposal. The consequences will be cessation of supplies to the entire forest zone, including the essential industrial centers of Moscow and St. Petersburg." Next, I quote from the last 11 lines of page 2 and all of page 3 of the English text. The German text begins in the middle of line 6 of page 5 and continues through to line 29 of page 6. I quote, "This, the cessation of supplies, means, 1, all industry in the deficit area, particularly the manufacturing industries in the Moscow and Petersburg regions, as well as the Ural industrial region, will be abandoned. It may be assumed that these regions today absorb an annual 5 to 10 million tons from the food production zone. 2, the Transcaucasian oil district will have to be accepted, although it is a deficit area. This source of oil, cotton, manganese, copper, silk, and tea must continue to be supplied with food in any case for special political and economic reasons. 3, no further exceptions with a view to preserving one or the other industrial region or industrial enterprise must be permitted. 4, industry can only be preserved insofar as it is located in the surplus region. This applies, apart from the above-mentioned oil field regions in the Caucasus, particularly to the heavy industries in the Donetsk district, Ukraine. Only the future will show to what extent it will prove possible to maintain in full these industries, and in particular the Ukrainian manufacturing industries, after the withdrawal of the food surpluses required by Germany. The following consequences result from this situation, which has received the approval of the highest authorities, since it is in accord with the political tendencies, preservation of the small Russians, preservation of the Caucasus, of the Baltic provinces, of White Russia, to the prejudice of the great Russians. 1, for the forest belt. Production in the forest belt, the food deficit area, will become naturalized, similar to the events during the World War, viz. Agriculture in that territory will begin to become a mere home production. The result will be that the planting of products destined for the market, such as, in particular, flax and hemp, will be discontinued, and the area used, therefore, will be taken over for products for the producer, grain, potatoes, etc. Moreover, discontinuance of fodder for that area will lead to the collapse of the dairy production and of pig producing in that territory. B. Germany is not interested in the maintenance of the productive power of these territories, except for the supplying of the troops stationed there. The population, as in the old days, will utilize arable land for growing its own food. It is useless to expect grain or other surpluses to be produced. Only after many years can these extensive regions be intensified to an extent that they might produce genuine surpluses. The population of these areas, in particular the urban population, will have to face most serious distress from famine. It will be necessary to divert the population into the Siberian spaces. Since rail transport is out of the question, this too will be an exceedingly difficult problem. C. In this situation, Germany will only draw substantial advantage by quick, non-recurrent seizure, i.e., it will be vitally necessary to make the entire flax harvest available for German needs, not only the fibers, but also the oleaginous seed. It will be also necessary to utilize for German purposes the livestock which has no fodder base of its own, i.e., it will be necessary to seize livestock holdings immediately and to make them available to the troops not only for the moment, but in the long run, and also for exportation to Germany. Since fodder supplies will be cut off, pig and cattle holdings in these areas will of necessity drastically decline in the near future. If they are not seized by the Germans at an early date, they will be slaughtered by the population for its own use without Germany getting anything out of it. Our next quotation is from the first paragraph.
Don't go too fast.
Sorry, sir.
Yes.
That's the end of that particular quotation. Our next quotation is from the first paragraph of page 4 of the English text. The German text is at page 7, last two words of line 26, down to the beginning of line 31. Quote, "It has been demanded by the Fuhrer that the reduction in the meat ration should be made good by the fall. This can only be achieved by the most drastic seizures of Russian livestock holdings, particularly in areas which are in a favorable transport situation in relation to Germany." Unquote. In the interest of expedition, Your Honors, I am omitting some sections from this lengthy exhibit which I had originally intended to quote. I skip now to line 29 of page 4 of the English text, beginning with the underscored words "in future," and quote to line 48. In the German text, it is at page 8, third line from the bottom, continuing to line 17 of page 9. Quote, "In future, southern Russia must turn its face towards Europe. Its food surpluses, however, will only be paid for if it purchases its industrial consumer goods from Germany or Europe. Russian competition from the forest zone must therefore be abolished. It follows from all that has been said that the German administration in these territories may well attempt to mitigate the consequences of the famine which undoubtedly will take place, and to accelerate the return to primitive agricultural conditions. An attempt might be made to intensify cultivation in these areas by expanding the acreage under potatoes or other important food crops given a high yield. However, these measures will not avert famine. Many tens of millions of people in this area will become redundant and will either die or have to emigrate to Siberia. Any attempt to save the population there from death by starvation by importing surpluses from the black soil zone would be at the expense of supplies to Europe. It would reduce Germany's staying power in the war and would undermine Germany's and Europe's power to resist the blockade. This must be clearly and absolutely understood. Close quote. Our next quote from page 5, lines 18 to 30 of the English text. The German text is at page 12, lines 1 to 11. I quote, and the German text is at page 12, lines 1 to 11. Quote, 1. Supplies for the army. Germany's food situation in the third year of war demands it imperatively that the Wehrmacht, in all its provisioning, must not live off Greater German territory or that of incorporated or friendly areas from which this territory receives imports. This minimum aim, the provisioning of the Wehrmacht from enemy territory in the third year, and if necessary in later years, must be attained at any price. This means that 1/3 of the Wehrmacht must be fully provisioned by French deliveries to the Army of Occupation. The remaining 2/3, parenthesis, and even slightly more, in view of the present size of the Wehrmacht, close parenthesis, must without exception be provisioned from the eastern space, close quote. I now quote from page 8 of the English text, the last 9 lines. The German text is at page 18, lines 15 to 22. I quote, "Thus it is not important under any circumstances to preserve what has existed, but what matters is a deliberate turning away from the existing situation and introducing Russian food resources into the European framework. This will inevitably result in an extinction of industry as well as of a large part of the people in what so far have been the food deficit areas. It is impossible to state an alternative in sufficiently hard and severe terms." Close quote. My next quotation is from the first 10 lines of page 9 of the English text. The German text is at page 19, lines 11 to 20. Quote, "Our problem is not to replace intensive food production in Europe through the incorporation of new space in the East, but to replace imports from overseas by imports from the East. The task is twofold. One, we must use the eastern spaces for overcoming the food shortages during and after the war. This means that we must not be afraid of drawing upon the capital substance of the East. Such an intervention is much more acceptable from the European standpoint than drawing upon the capital substance of Europe's agriculture. Finally, I quote from the remainder of page 9 to the end of the penultimate paragraph of the English text. In the German text, it appears at lines 24 to 31 of page 19. Page 19, lines 24 to 31 of the German text. Quote, 2. For the future new order, the food-producing areas in the East must be turned into a permanent and substantial complementary source of food for Europe through intensified cultivation and resulting higher yields. The first named task must be accomplished at any price, even through the most ruthless cutting down of Russian domestic consumption, which will require discrimination between the consuming and producing zones, unquote. It is submitted, Your Honors, that this document discloses on its face a studied plan to murder millions of innocent people through starvation. It reveals a program of premeditated murder on a scale so vast as to stagger the human imagination. Mr. Elwyn Jones of the British delegation will subsequently show that this plan was, in effect, the logical culmination of general objectives clearly announced by Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf. Each defendant in the box was fully aware of these general objectives when he committed the acts with which he is charged. I next introduce in evidence a document no less damning than the one I have just quoted. This document is document number L221, which is USA Exhibit 317. This is a top-secret memorandum dated 16 July 1941 of a conference at the Fuhrer's headquarters concerning the war in the East. It seems to have been prepared by Defendant Bormann because his initials appear at the top of page 1. It was captured by a United States counterintelligence branch. The text of the memorandum indicates that the conference was attended by Hitler, Lammers, and defendants Goering, Keitel, Rosenberg, and Bormann. The exhibit is particularly important for the light it throws upon the conspirators' plans to Germanize conquered areas of the Soviet Union. It is important also for its disclosure of the utterly fraudulent character of the whole Nazi propaganda program. It shows how the conspirators sought to deceive the entire world, how they pretended to pursue one course of action when their aims and purposes were to follow precisely the opposite course. I first quote from page 1 of the English text, beginning at line 14 and continuing through to line 22 of page 2. The German text is at page 1, beginning with the last paragraph and continuing through to line 19 of page 3. I quote, "Now it was essential that we did not publicize our aims before the world. Also, there was no need for that. But the main thing was that we ourselves knew what we wanted. By no means should we render our task more difficult by making superfluous declarations. Such declarations were superfluous because we could do everything wherever we had the power, and what was beyond our power we would not be able to do anyway. What we told the world about the motives for our measures ought to be conditioned, therefore, by tactical reasons. We ought to act here in exactly the same way as we did in the cases of Norway, Denmark, Holland, and Belgium. In these cases, too, we did not publish our aims, and it was only sensible to continue in the same way. Therefore, we shall emphasize again that we were forced to occupy, administer, and secure a certain area. It was in the interest of the inhabitants that we provided order, food, traffic, etc. Hence our measures. Nobody shall be able to recognize that it initiates a final settlement. This need not prevent our taking all necessary measures, shooting, desettling, etc., and we shall take them. But we do not want to make any people into enemies prematurely and unnecessarily. Therefore, we shall act as though we wanted to exercise a mandate only. At the same time, we must know clearly that we shall never leave those countries. Our conduct, therefore, ought to be, 1, to do nothing which might obstruct the final settlement, but to prepare for it only in secret. 2, to emphasize that we are liberators. In particular, the Crimea has to be evacuated by all foreigners and to be settled by Germans only. In the same way, the former Austrian part of Galicia will become Reich territory. Our present relations with Romania are good, but nobody knows what they will be at any future time. This we have to consider, and we have to draw our frontiers accordingly. One ought not to be dependent on the goodwill of other people. We have to plan our relations with Romania in accordance with this principle. On principle, we have now to face the task of cutting up the giant cake according to our needs in order to be able, first, to dominate it, second, to administer it, and third, to exploit it. The Russians have now ordered partisan warfare behind our front. This partisan war, again, has some advantage for us. It enables us to eradicate everyone who opposes us. Principles. Never again must it be possible to create a military power west of the Urals. Even if we have to wage war for 100 years in order to attain this goal. Every successor of the Fuhrer should know security for the Reich exists only if there are no foreign military forces west of the Urals. It is Germany who undertakes the protection of this area against all possible dangers. Our iron principle is and has to remain: we must never permit anybody but the Germans to carry arms. Close quote. Our next quote from page 3, lines 19 to 31 of the English text. In the German text, this is at the last 13 lines of page 5. Quote, "The Fuhrer emphasizes that the entire Baltic country will have to be incorporated into Germany. At the same time, the Crimea, including a considerable hinterland situated north of the Crimea, should become Reich territory. The hinterland should be as large as possible." Rosenberg objects to this because of the Ukrainians living there. Parenthesis, incidental question. It occurred to me several times that Rosenberg has a soft touch for the Ukrainians. Thus he desires to aggrandize the former Ukraine to a considerable extent. Departing from the text for just a moment, it may be noted parenthetically that this was the only aspect of the program outlined by Hitler at this meeting to which Rosenberg objected in any way. Resuming the quotation, quote, "The Fuhrer emphasizes furthermore that the Volga colony too will have to become Reich territory. Also the district around Baku. The latter will have to become a German concession, military colony." Close quote. Thus the program, as outlined by the conspirators at this meeting of 16 July 1941, called for the unlawful incorporation of a part of Galicia and all of the Baltic countries into Germany, and for the unlawful conversion of the Crimea and areas north of it, the Volga territory, and the district around Baku into German colonies. In further support of this point, I invite the attention of your honors to document number 1029 PS, already introduced in evidence by Mr. Alderman as exhibit number USA 145. This document was not included in our document book, your honors, but has been read into the record by Mr. Alderman at pages 1202 and 1203. This document is entitled, quote, "Instructions for a Reich Commissar in the Baltic countries and White Russia." Close quote.
Where are you quoting now?
Sir, it is not included in our document book, but it's in the record at pages 1202 and 1203. In the German text, the original which we have here, it's at pages number 2 and 3 of the German text.
Of 1202 PS?
No, sir, at 1202 of the record, the PS number is 1029. That's USA exhibit number 145. Quote, "The aim of a Reich Commissar for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and White Russia," last two words added in pencil, must be to strive to achieve the form of a German protectorate, and then transform the region into part of the greater German Reich by Germanizing racially possible elements, colonizing Germanic races, and banishing undesirable elements. The Baltic Sea must become a Germanic inland sea under the guardianship of Greater Germany.
Yes.
I now offer in evidence document number EC3, which is USA Exhibit number 318. This document was likewise found among the captured OKW files at Feckenheim. This document, Your Honors, is offered as direct proof of the fact, to which we have previously referred, that even in the food surplus areas of the occupied regions of the Ukraine, the conspirators planned to allocate food on a basis which left virtually nothing for those persons who were not engaged in the compulsory production of commodities for the German war machine. This document, as well as document number EC126, which was introduced a few moments ago, and others we offer, should, it is submitted, be read in the light of the explicit provision in Article 52 of the Hague Regulations of 1907, the requisitions in kind and services shall not be demanded from municipalities or inhabitants except for the needs of the Army of Occupation. I first quote from our page 3, lines 21 to 23 of the English text of EC3. In the German text, it is at page 13, lines 1 to 3. The particular document from which I am about to quote is a top-secret memorandum dated 16 September 1941 concerning a meeting of German military officials presided over by Defendant Goering. This is at our page number 3, sir, lines 21 to 23 of EC3. The memorandum was signed by General Nagel, liaison officer between Defendant Goering's 4-year plan office and the OKW. I now quote, "At this conference, which was concerned with the better exploitation of the occupied territories for the German food economy, the Reich Marshal Goering called attention to the following." Close quote. I next quote from the first 2 paragraphs of page 4 of the English text. The German text is at page 13, 3rd and 4th paragraphs. Quote, "It is clear that a graduated scale of food allocations is needed. First in line are the combat troops, then the remainder of troops in enemy territory, and then those troops stationed at home. The rates are adjusted accordingly. The supply of the German non-military population follows, and only then comes the population of the occupied countries." Close quote. I now quote from another portion of this document, starting at our page 1 of the English text. This is a memorandum dated 25 November 1941 relating to the general principles of economic policy in the newly occupied Eastern Territories, as prescribed in a conference held in Berlin on 8 November 1941. This memorandum was also written by General Nagel. It is on the stationery of the liaison staff of the Supreme Headquarters Armament Procurement Office with the Reich Marshal Goering. I quote from lines 13 to the bottom of page 1 of the English text.
Captain Harris, isn't this document, the part you're going to read now, merely cumulative to EC 126, which you've just read to us? That economic policy directive?
It's further proof of that fact, sir. I can omit it if you like.
Well, it doesn't seem to me to add to it.
Emphasize a rather obvious point I'm frank to concede, Your Honor. I shall pass on to the next point. On 17 July 1941, Hitler and the defendant Keitel issued a decree appointing defendant Rosenberg as the Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. This was the day following the meeting at the Führer's headquarters, which is reported in document number L221, and from which we have already quoted at length. The decree appointing Rosenberg as Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories is set forth in document number 1997 PS, which is U.S. Exhibit number 319, and I offer it in evidence. I quote from Articles 2 and 4 on page 1 of this decree. The German text is at pages 27 and 28, lines 2 and 4. Quote,
Thanks.
the civil administration in the newly occupied Eastern Territories, where these territories are not included in the administration of the territories bordering on the Reich or the general government, is subject to the Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. I appoint Alfred Rosenberg as Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. He will hold office in Berlin. Defendant Rosenberg's views well fitted him for his task as one of the chief executioners of the conspirators' plans in the Soviet Union. His views were plainly expressed in a speech delivered on 20 June 1940 and is set forth in document number 1058 PS, now USA Exhibit number 147. I refer your honors to the first 3 sentences of the English text. The German text appears on page 9, last 5 lines, and continuing through to line 2 of page 10. In the speech, defendant Rosenberg stated, and I quote, "The job of feeding the German people stands this year, without a doubt, at the top of the list of Germany's claims on the East. And here the southern territories and the northern Caucasus will have to serve as a balance for the feeding of the German people. We see absolutely no reason or any obligation on our part to feed also the Russian people with the products of that surplus territory. We know that this is a harsh necessity, bare of any feelings. I next offer in evidence document number EC 347, which is USA Exhibit number 320. This document was likewise found among the captured files of the OKW. It contains a set of directives issued by Defendant Rosenberg in his capacity as Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. I quote from the first two full paragraphs of page 1 of this exhibit. The German text is at page 39, paragraphs 4 and 5. In these directives, Defendant Rosenberg stated, and I quote, "The principal task of the civilian administration in the occupied Eastern Territories is to represent the interest of the Reich. This basic principle is to be given precedence in all measures and considerations. Therefore, the occupied territories in the future may be permitted to have a life of their own in a form not as yet to be determined. However, they remain parts of the greater German living space and are always to be governed according to this guiding principle. The regulations of the Hague Convention on Land Warfare, which concern the administration of a country occupied The regulations of the Hague Convention on Land Warfare, which concern the administration of a country occupied by a foreign belligerent power, are not applicable, since the USSR is to be considered dissolved, and therefore the Reich has the obligation of exercising all governmental and other sovereign functions in the interests of the country's inhabitants. Therefore, any measures are permitted which the German administration deems necessary and suitable for the execution of this comprehensive task."
Has that been read before?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
No.
Implicit in Defendant Rosenberg's statement that the Hague regulations are not applicable to the Soviet Union is the recognition by him that the conspirators' actions in the Soviet Union flagrantly violated the Hague regulations. The statement indicates that the conspirators were utterly contemptuous of applicable principles of international law. Mr. Dodd has already introduced into evidence document number 294 PS, now USA Exhibit number 185, in connection with his slave labor presentation. This document is a top-secret memorandum dated 25 October 1942, which was found in Defendant Rosenberg's files. It was written by a Mr. Bräutigam, who was a high official in Defendant Rosenberg's ministry for the occupied Eastern Territories. I should like to quote two additional passages from this document. I quote from the English text, page 1, the first full paragraph, and lines 17 to 20. The German text is at page 1, the first full paragraph, and lines 22 to 25. Quote, "In the East, Germany is carrying on a threefold war. A war for the destruction of Bolshevism, a war for the destruction of the greater Russian Empire, and finally a war for the acquisition of colonial territory for colonizing purposes and economic exploitation. With the inherent instinct of the Eastern peoples, the primitive man soon found out also that for Germany, the slogan "liberation from Bolshevism" was only a pretext to enslave the Eastern peoples according to her own methods. This completes, Your Honors, the list of exhibits with respect to the Soviet Union which we propose to introduce at this time. As I mentioned at the outset of this presentation, these exhibits do not disclose all of the conspirators' plans with respect to the occupied countries. But they do, it is submitted, show a constant pattern, a pattern of ruthless Germanization and destruction. In conclusion, we desire to offer into evidence two documents which disclose that German industrialists and financiers aided and abetted Himmler in his relentless program of Germanization, exploitation, oppression, and destruction. I first offer in evidence document number EC 454, which is USA exhibit number 321. This document was found in the vaults of the Stein Bank in Cologne among the files of the banker Baron Kurt von Schroeder by a joint British-American team headed by Colonel Kellum on the British side and Captain Roth on the American side. It is a carbon copy of a letter from von Schroeder to Himmler, dated 27 August 1943, and bears von Schroeder's initials. I quote it in its entirety. Quote, "My very honorable Reichsfuhrer, with great joy I learn of your appointment as Reichsminister of the Interior and take the liberty to extend my heartiest congratulations to you on assuming your new post. A strong hand is now very necessary in the operation of this department, and it is universally welcomed, but especially by your friends, that it was you who were chosen for this by the Fuhrer. Please be assured that we will always do everything in our power at all times to assist you in every possible way. I am pleased to inform you at this opportunity that your circle of friends has again placed at your disposal this year a sum slightly in excess of 1 million Reichsmarks for special purposes. An exact list showing the name of the contributors will be sent to you shortly. Again, all my very best wishes, as well as those of my family, I remain yours in old loyalty and esteem. Heil Hitler, yours truly." I next offer in evidence, and this is the final exhibit, Your Honors, document number EC 453, which is U.S. exhibit number 322. This document was likewise found in the Stein Bank in Cologne by the above-mentioned joint British-American team. It is a carbon copy of a letter from von Schroeder to Himmler, dated 21 September 1943, bearing von Schroeder's initials, with an enclosed list of contributors to Himmler.
Captain Harris, on what principle do you suggest that either of these letters can possibly be evidence in this case?
Your Honors, at the time the motion to postpone the trial as to Gustav Krupp was argued before this tribunal, the British chief prosecutor specifically stated that if it should be the decision of the tribunal that Krupp should be dismissed, the evidence as to the part which he, his firm, and other industrialists played in the preparation and conduct of the war would still be given to this tribunal as forming part of the general conspiracy in which these defendants were involved with divers other persons not now before the court. The evidence we are now offering, Your Honors, is precisely of the type indicated by Sir Hartley Shawcross. It is evidence which goes to prove the length and breadth of the general conspiracy which is alleged in the indictment. Evidence showing contribution to one of the leading conspirators, a conspirator who was in the forefront of the unlawful program to plunder public and private property and to Germanize a large part of the world, is, it is submitted, relevant to this proceeding. May I continue?
Yes.
I quote the last letter, that's EC 453 in its entirety. Dear Reich Leader, I thank you very much for your kind letter of the 14th of this month, with which you made me very happy. At the same time, I am enclosing a list with the total amount of funds made available to you by your circle of friends and totaling 1 million Reichsmark. We are very glad indeed to render some assistance to you in your special task to be able to provide some small relief for you in your still further extended sphere of duty. Wishing you, dear Reichsleader, the best of luck, I remain in old loyalty and esteem, Heil Hitler, yours very truly. I had intended, Your Honor, to quote the names of the contributors, shall not.
I don't think it would add to the expedition of the trial, do you?
Very well, sir.